So hi everybody, like I was introduced, I'm Kathryn Florence. I'm actually a master's student over at the art history department. So this is going to have nothing to do with religion very much, so it was very interesting to be invited here. So let's start by getting the elephant out of the way. I'm here at a conference speaking about why our conference setup sucks. So I'm going to be talking about implementing remote conferencing, and yet I'm physically here. And the reason I'm tackling this topic is because I've been on the other side of the conference line. And I know how important it is to have your work be seen and heard, at the same time how privileged and expensive that is. So in light of this conference, this gathering of interdisciplinarity, we have to take a moment to wonder just who is able to speak and who is able to listen. Traditional conferences, with their ephemerality, cumulative costs, and very much laser-focused audiences, have been barriers to the very knowledge they're meant to make available. In short, few students have the time and money to attend conferences, which turns presentations into privileged encounters. Conference papers are themselves written with jargon that can be unintelligible outside of its native field, which discourages students from submitting to or other disciplinary scholars from understanding. This presentation, I hope, will demonstrate how we can reformat conferences to better facilitate interdisciplinary conversation and collaboration, in turn demolishing the barriers between academia, the public, and nearly everything in between. I'm proposing that we need to shift how we share our knowledge by utilizing these flexible presentation formats and reducing the stigma of, frankly, a simplified language. We can't work together if we continue to speak within our own circles, assuming we're able to speak at all. So as graduate students, we're expected to be active participants in colloquiums, conferences, and lectures. Publish or perish, as the saying goes. And we're encouraged to present our current research to our peers and the wider field. The more ambitious will prowl the web for call for papers, CFPs, and other opportunities. I personally use H-Announce, which is where I find most of mine. And I checked yesterday, it currently has over 1,141 active calls within the next year. And there are countless sites like this. And a few lucky scholars will be chosen to present at esteemed conferences and share their knowledge. The average graduate student will attend at least one conference in their career, with the average being 2 to 3 per year for more proactive students. So I fall a little bit outside of that normal realm. Last year, 2017 to 2018, I attended 4 conferences. This year, I'm presenting at 7. So this is a quick look at what I was spending last year to present physically at 4 conferences. And the numbers in brackets, that's a negative dollar amount. So looking at this, the bottom line is, even with a $900 grant to cover costs, I'm still paying $800 USD, which in Canadian is over $1,000 out of pocket. And that's with one conference being completely covered by the host. I have the luxury of having these kinds of grants at my disposal, and there are a lot of people that don't. So who goes to these conferences? Well, we know the organizers should. At least I hope they do. Then there are the speakers. Again, I really hope they go. But who else is in the audience? Do we have graduate students? Who else here is not a graduate student or a professor? 2? Are you guys undergraduates? Yeah, you're undergraduates. So this is a university conference, and you'll likely have people in the department, a few undergraduates, as we have here. But at professional conferences, you get vendors and supporting branch societies. Like, I'm an art historian and an anthropologist, so one of my presentations was at the Society for American Archaeology, last year, and that is a professional conference for archaeologists. Basically, attendance is by people who are either directly invested in the conference or, actually no, that's basically it. You have to be directly invested in the conference. People who know where to look. And we know this underneath it all. That's a pretty narrow audience scope. You have to know where to look to know there's going to be a conference and then have the ability to get there. So like I was saying, at the SAA annual in 2018, there were so many presentations in the program. It was literally a book, a full-scale book with 300 pages, just to list all the panels and the abstracts. There were at least 5 panels running concurrently over the duration of the conference, which was itself a 5-day thing. And there were a lot of great presentations that I really wanted to go to, but I couldn't, because I was either in another panel, or was at a meeting, or was just at a different obligation. And basically, if you weren't at that panel, then you have no idea what got said. Here's the thing. Even if the presentation that was being given was based on an already published paper, which isn't even a guarantee, you can't access the information that was presented afterwards. So much of the work that goes into these conferences, these presentations, is never shared outside of that 20-minute window. And this is what I mean when I say ephemerality. The conferences are ephemeral. For a few days, we get together, we talk a lot, and then we go home and go back to work as usual. And a lot of the time, it's a whirlwind, and you can't even really let everything sink in until after closing remarks are given. And if you have questions, well, what do you do then? How do you go back to the sources if you can't remember what a person said? So clearly, conferences are good for several reasons, but they're also a bit problematic. As graduate students, we're tutored to get into journals, to get recognition, and only use peer-reviewed forums, present at conferences to meet others in the field, get known by other professionals. And while that's great for your career, it doesn't actually help our disciplines get together or get along. You end up talking about new things, but you're going in circles, and we end up only producing for ourselves instead of producing for the greater society we're supposed to be helping. And even then, conferences are divided along privileged lines. When we look at participation as a function of cost and direct benefit, then we see that attendance is not actually all that inclusive. You have to have the resources to get into the conference, then the resources to be able to participate. This is the metaphorical ivory tower, that disinterest with the current status outside of its walls and the inability of the outside to get in. If these conferences, these get-togethers for sharing knowledge are about sharing the latest and cutting edge, yet we've been keeping all of this to ourselves. If these conferences are so important, why are we not doing something to make it easier to access? And truly, I got frustrated with all this self-imposed inaccessibility. So, in my backpack is my phone. It's a device that can fit in my hand, and I can access tens of thousands of papers, record video and audio for a couple of hours on its own battery life, and listen to previously streamed broadcasts and podcasts. We have the means to make the conference more easily accessible for both participants and for people who are traditionally barred by the barriers of traditional conferences produce. So let's look at my conference circuit again, this time for this year. That's 7 conferences across 3 countries. I am a mad woman, that is for sure, but I'm a mad woman with a computer and Skype. I will still be able to present at these conferences without all that much trouble on their end, because I'm only physically presenting at 3 conferences. Here, Queen's University, which itself is being reimbursed, and at Purdue University in Indiana. Now, you may be wondering, hey, why did you not go to Detroit, but then you went to Indiana? And honestly, that was a selfish decision. My mom lives in Indiana, so it's a 90-minute drive, so it's a good reason for me to take a long weekend and visit her. So let's take a look at the cost difference. Again, parentheses mean a negative. So $5,200 to be present at all conferences versus when we take into account just presenting virtually, only $600. That's a big difference, especially for a student like me that is very much on a shoestring budget as is. And on top of that, let's not forget the green incentive of traveling less. It's beneficial for organizers as well to implement using virtual presentations. You can have someone presenting from the other side of the globe, quite literally in the case of the last one, which is in France. You can connect with scholars that you would never been able to meet, and include countless more students who wouldn't be able to afford the investment otherwise. A one-day conference could turn into a multi-day affair without really raising the costs exponentially if we include virtuals. So, I do record all of my lectures, and this is actually my YouTube page where you can see it. We have the ability to record them and to present later. So in practice, this actually has occurred where there are conferences that use virtual presentation, complete panels virtually. I was participating 2 years ago at Common Ground Research Networks. Arts and Society Research Network already does it. They're called lightning talks and are around 5 to 10 minutes, but this mode can easily be extended to a typical 15 to 20-minute conference. So, again, in my hand, a phone has Facebook, YouTube, Vimeo. They all provide the ability to live stream video. Anybody been using any of these today? Anybody even been bothering to live tweet or simul-posting? Why not? Again, like I said, I recorded every presentation I give, including this one. And when I get home, I line up the audio with my slides, I export to an MP4 and post to my YouTube. That way, if somebody had to miss the conference, or if somebody didn't even know about the conference and wanted to know about it 5 years down the road, they can still access it. Now, I understand that these modes of presentation aren't without their drawbacks either. When you're presenting virtually, oftentimes the person presenting can't face the audience. They can't interact and get that one-to-one feedback. I don't know how my audience was reacting when I was talking about the Never Alone game in Detroit, because I could only see what my screen was sharing. And again, there's also the drawback in that you have to have the technology to, present these. Who gets the rights to the video? Who gets the right to post it? But by far, the benefits outweigh the drawbacks. So the last thing I want to talk about is addressing the language barrier that conferences put up. When we talk to ourselves, talk in circles, we forget that other people want to listen too. We have all of this knowledge, but no one outside of the field understands it because academia speaks in discipline-specific jargon. If I want to talk to my mother about what I study in art history or in anthropology, I can't use typical journal language because as a nurse, she wouldn't understand it. It's like a monolingual English speaker trying to use a calculus textbook written in Chinese. You can't apply something you don't understand. So we have to realize that we shouldn't just be writing for academics, but for real people too. It won't get you into journals, but that's kind of the point. It's much more engaging, much more fun. I was at your panel earlier this morning, and you took creative liberties with how you were writing, how you were speaking to us. That was the first time in, 6 years that I ever gave thought to the Torah, the Tanakh, or the Bible. And I actually learned something about the story of Isaac and how we read and look at these narratives. There's a stigma against speaking like a normal person in conferences, being seen as unprofessional for plain language in place of a more astute lexicon. But complex language makes ideas harder to understand, and I don't mean dumbing it down. You're already at the position of being the voice of authority. We know you're smart. We know you know your stuff. The point is to teach us what you know. So, when I started my graduate career, I was told to read Sean Wilson's Research is Ceremony. And Wilson put into words a notion that I had been struggling with during my undergraduate, trying to get my research published. Quote, "This commonality is that knowledge is seen as being individual in nature. This is vastly different from the indigenous paradigm where knowledge is seen as belonging to the cosmos, which we are a part of, and where researchers are only the interpreters of this knowledge," end quote. Knowledge is for all, and when we obscure it through jargon, this intentional ephemerality and paywalls, we do ourselves a disservice. We prevent collaboration. We prevent growth. As scholars, not academics, but stewards of understanding and pursuers of discovery, we shouldn't stand in our own way of our goals. Conferences themselves do not have to be as problematic as they are. And hopefully, as I've shown through my own experiences and more, they stand to reap the benefits of a flexible platform and open access. These means provide greater public access to academia, give undergraduates experience, connect disparate scholars geographically as well as across disciplines, and democratize knowledge. Isn't that what we're all about? Thank you. Yes.
So thank you very much for that. It was fascinating. And so one of the I think part of your work that I find most interesting is your work on jargon and sort of how inaccessible our language is just to anyone. Never mind, just like lay people or whatever.
Yeah.
Who are out on the street, but even just to people in other disciplines, and the fact that a philosophy student and an anthropology student are going to have a hard time talking to each other. I think so. I think that's really important. I was wondering, do you have any thoughts or I mean, I know you have a lot of thoughts, but do you have any thoughts about I guess sort of how or whether that can reasonably be applied sort of outside the conference space as well, like in academic writing generally, which is also tends to be very jargony, because arguably there is a place for jargon and specialized language if you know you're speaking to other professionals, to other people in your field, right? So. But at the same time, a lot of academic writing is extremely inaccessible even for people in the field. So do you feel that there's something that can be done about that as well? Or?
So I'm just trying to make sure I get all these questions correct in my head. So the first question was, my thoughts on us having specific jargon and how we should dismantle it?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I guess, do you feel that there is a place for it?
Is there a place for it?
Places in the academy?
Okay.
Where should the line be? Maybe?
So I do feel like we really need to dismantle a lot of the jargon. I understand that some of these terms, some of our lexicon is actually very much important, and we have come up with these terms for a specific reason. And we can employ those, but also remembering that, okay, even if somebody within the discipline is also reading it, they might not be that high in academia either. When I first pick up a journal in my undergraduate, I could read maybe 1 out of every 6 words. And how does that help teach our next generation of scholars if they can't understand it and they need to go through 4 or maybe more years of specific tutoring to just be able to get a grip? Yes, there are places where jargon isn't jargon, it's actual terminology that is useful. I think the difference between those two is when we're using it to sound smart versus when we're using it to be precise. So use it where it's actually needed and just speak simply. If you're trying to explain it to somebody who have a passing familiarity, an undergraduate, a first year. Yeah?
Yeah, I'm not sure if you've ever looked into this, but I know Orwell especially proposed a lot of restructuring of academic English language to especially the banning of words that are overly complex to the point where an average person will never be able to read.
Orwell.
Yeah, he actually did. He died before he got really into this, but this was one of his passions.
Yeah, I remember Orwell from, we're talking about the author Orwell in English, yeah. 1984, I remember because he was very obsessed with Newspeak. It's been a while actually since I've read him.
But he actually, in real life, not in the book, proposed restructuring the academic writing's programs.
Well, the thing is, academic writing is always, culture is always evolving, adapting, and changing. So just implementing it yourself can, down the road, snowball into something bigger that changes how we speak. Thankfully, it's evidence because thankfully we no longer speak like how Kant did and how people in the 17th century did. It's changing, and it's just a matter of recognizing that, okay, we need to start changing again. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Wondering, because you brought up ephemerality, and I don't know, just the best conference experiences that I've had have been ones where I came into a space, usually from outside. It's a new space, I'm the person coming in. And it's the transient nature of the conference while I'm experiencing it that almost creates the positive experience for me, if that makes sense. And I'm not sure if I can quantify that in any
I understand what you're saying. The ephemerality of the conference is a benefit as well as it can be a drawback if we just leave it as the practice as it is now, like I said, without any means of either sharing that knowledge outside of the conference or after the fact. The SAAs and many of the conferences I went to were very much enjoyable, being able to get together and actually sit down and talk with these people. Again, something that you can't do in a virtual presentation afterwards. So the ephemerality it's two sides of a coin. On one side, yes, it's beneficial, and I'm not saying that we should get rid of all conferences altogether and do everything virtually, but just recognizing that while it's beneficial at the time, it's also detrimental in a longer run. So,
I guess just a follow-up, it's okay. Is the onus to some extent, is that not on the individual presenters to then sort of take their research elsewhere? Or, I agree with you that it's sort of it is this ephemeral thing where so much gets lost. You can't necessarily refer back to it in a way that's trustworthy, I suppose, because you can take notes, but you don't necessarily know they're entirely accurate. But yeah, are we abdicating responsibility to an extent if we sort of aren't willing to then sort of turn that into a paper, or we don't want to kind of, obviously you are, because you are publishing it. You're publishing it online, so yeah.
I don't think that I'm not trying to say here that it's all our faults. We should all be doing everything we can to have all of our papers published, because that's just honestly not going to happen. Academic journals just don't care that much about some paper you wrote for a very, very specific conference about creation and destruction and mythology. They don't care. And outside of journals, where can we really get those published in a meaningful way? But I think that at least by taking on the initiative, either ourselves as individual presenters or as greater conferences, at least having some sort of file, some sort of recognition beyond just this person presented here, there's a brief abstract, would go a long way. Yes?
Okay, so I'm trying to think of other scenarios where your methodology will work, and we had taken the curatorial practices last semester together, so I'm thinking like this might be useful in like say a museum setting. Can you think of any other institutions where implementing something where like knowledge sharing can be used virtually as well as institutionally to form a wider audience?
Well, I mean, we're already working on, museums, yeah, they're starting to actually do what the next panel is doing, podcasts. And you'll find courses like Open University, I believe Oxford also does it for some of their courses, are actually presented in podcast form. And I don't go to Oxford, but I can learn about anthropology from them, hooray. So in education, that's something, even just, again, it could even just be an individual that says, hey, I have something that's worth sharing, and it won't get into conferences, or there isn't a conference that's going to be about this, or it's just so niche. But if you have a computer, access to a YouTube account, you can put it up there and anybody around the world can see it. So I hope that answers your question. It's very open-ended. I'm sorry, I really see it in a very vast terms of any form of knowledge is meant to be shared.
Well, I was even thinking like how, we didn't talk about this in our class, but like street art was specifically used to like get out of the institution and make art for all, and it kind of get eliminating the knowledge and aesthetics only for those who go into the museum space, which is exclusive to the people who don't go to those places, which are a great majority. So I was just thinking in like other terms, like how could we like implement this, okay, outside of academia, like we wouldn't be posting conference seminars on buildings, for instance, but maybe there's another way that, we can nuance it through technology where it can be accessed, maybe not through the internet on a screen, but in a way where we're interacting with people in everyday scenarios.
That's interesting, and I didn't really think about that. I've honestly been focused on just the recording of the ephemeral aspects for preservation in the future or outside of the borders that we've created in terms of maps and in terms of disciplines. That's very interesting to think about, and thank you. Yeah.
I'm trying not to be cynical, and people who know this is my default position.
Oh, come on, be cynical. I can take it.
Okay. I think that your idea is fabulous, and I think it's absolutely something that we should do. To be clear,
Yeah.
I often come off sort of combative, and I don't want to make it seem like I'm disagreeing with you. I think that if it's going to become a thing that people start to do, we as academics and scholars have to be very careful not to let the administrative arms of universities get their hands on it. Because 15 minutes after we start doing it, universities are going to start making people pay for it. And they're going to start saying, if you're going to upload your thing to our conference, it has to go on our website, and somebody has to have a $70 subscription. You know what I mean? That's just the monetization of the university is this endemic problem, and I don't know, do you feel that that's something that can be avoided at all, or is this the inevitable future of this, that people are still going to have to pay to be able to receive this?
If you're a student, I don't believe they own your intellectual property. I might be wrong about that. I am not a lawyer. That is my uncle Leo. He doesn't even do this kind of law work. He does real estate.
I don't think they do. I think you're right about that.
I don't think they do.
But what about if you're presenting at a professional conference? Can the American Academy of Religion say?
Could they? I think that's something that they would have to propose to the presenters. If they say, we're going to be doing this, then that gives you the right to say, no, I'm not okay
Yes.
with this, and presenting it on your own.
Right.
But legality-wise, I mean, it's something I do recognize. Universities are encroaching on that, and personally, I don't like it. I don't like how these institutions that are supposed to be about learning and about bettering people are very much exclusionary. It might take just being a bit of a rebel and saying, I'm gonna do it anyway.
YouTube anyway.
I just think back to there was a Russian scholar who posted 9,000 articles illegally for open access.
Yes.
And I'm just like, sometimes you just gotta say, no, I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a great attitude.
I've always been one that's just like, well, why aren't we?
Yeah.
I'm just gonna do it anyway.
What are they gonna do?
You can't teach people.
I just have kind of a question for the room, I guess, based on what you've been saying here, just maybe to conclude, but it isn't something that I do because I suck at the internet and social media and online stuff. And I wish I was better at it because obviously it has so many applications and it's so helpful and useful for a lot of people for sharing information. But I'm curious about how many people in the audience have has anyone incorporated this into their, I guess, academic life, into their research? I know increasingly people are doing this, keeping blogs, where they post their research and that kind of thing. So not even just videos, but print content as well. Is there anyone who actively does that?
It shouldn't be surprising that I do it.
Yeah.
I run a Tumblr. I'm one of those.
No? Yeah, I feel like it's something we're going to see increasingly. It's very popular in medieval studies, certainly, like at least amongst the sort of academics that I know and went to school with. They all have these amazing blogs and they, can write these pretty excellent and yet readable articles for sort of sharing online that then circulate amongst academic and non-academic observers. So.
Yeah.
I wonder if, not to be like, not just sort of periodize people,